It's time to talk about Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. Hello, book friends. Welcome back to the channel. It's Alyssa. Hello if you are new, and welcome to the next episode in my little series on my year with Jane Austen. We read Mansfield Park in July and August, so I have like several pages of notes of just things I kind of want to chat about now that I have read the Austen that I have always feared reading. I guess I'll try to give a very general summary. There are probably going to be spoilers in here. I always forget with classics that maybe you don't know what happened in the book. Maybe you didn't grow up watching PBS predominantly because you didn't have cable. And so you've watched like entirely too many adaptations of classic novels in your life. So I guess if you don't want to be spoiled for Mansfield Park, come back after you read it and we can talk about it. Essentially, the setup is that there are three sisters who get married to three very different men. One sister marries, he's a baronet or something, and that's Lady Bertram. And the other sister marries like a clergyman, and that's Mrs. Norris. And then Fanny Price, our main character, her mother marries for love, and she marries what ends up being a drunken sailor and has about 1,000 children. I think she has 8, but has a lot of children. And one day, out of the kindness of their hearts, Lady Bertram and Mrs. Norris decide that they are going to take in one of their sister's children to ease the burden on her. And originally they were looking for a boy, and that doesn't really end up working out. They get a girl. They get a girl, they get Fanny, and that's what happens. And I feel like it's very interesting that that's the way Austen decides to shape the novel, because her brother does get adopted by a rich family member and ends up becoming their de facto son because they have no heir and inherits the whole estate. And so it is something that wasn't an uncommon practice, but it also is something that Austen is familiar with in her own life. And I think it's interesting that she's changed genders. And I do wonder how different Fanny's life, and maybe if it had been her brother, what his life would have been like should the roles have been reversed in this story. I don't think it would have been as compelling a story if they had adopted one of the sons. Not even adopted, but taken in like a stray cat, one of the sons instead of one of the Price's daughters. But anyway, Fanny arrives very young, very like weak and malnourished to Mansfield Park, and she has 4 cousins. She's got Tom and Edmund, who are the boys, and Mariah, Maria, and Julia, who are the girls. Her aunt, Lady Bertram, is honestly goals. Like, she just lays on the couch all day and naps with her pugs and has bonbons. You know, like she does some embroidery. Like, I want to rot like that. That sounds great. But I must hustle to pay for bills. And then Mrs. Norris is widowed now, and she is horrible. She is like up there with the mom in East of Eden as like terrible, terrible, terrible female characters. Just like awful people. She's so bad. And more so Mrs. Norris than Lady Bertram. Lady Bertram is such a passive figure. It's hard to like, it's hard to get on her for too much. She's mostly napping, but Mrs. Norris in particular really just doesn't let Fanny forget that she is like a second-class citizen in this house. Mariah and Julia come first. The boys obviously come first above them. And Fanny is almost like a servant. Her job is to cater to the needs of Lady Bertram and Mrs. Norris if she wants, or the girls, and to be kind of quiet and only spoken when spoken to. Fanny does come off as a very insipid and pushover kind of character at first, but she really isn't. As the story goes on, you find that Fanny actually does have a lot more conviction in her own morals. She does understand her place. Almost reminds me of a very Victorian character, like Victorian middle class values. You know, she's all about propriety and following the rules. She's very godly and into like, you know, church and stuff, which I guess works for her and Edmund. She understands that she has a role to play there, and she understands to not have like ideas above her station. And she's okay with that. Like she really is fine with that. In fact, she's quite uncomfortable when things start to change for her throughout the story. One of the things that I think is really important at the beginning of this novel is this idea of how self-serving this good deed is for Mrs. Norris in particular and Lady Bertram. It feels like, oh, we gave you this place in this house and that's all we really need to do for you, right? Like you get some clothes and you get some food and like a room, but we don't need to make sure that you have very much enrichment. We don't need to make sure that you have a fire lit in your little sitting room. You don't need any of these things unless the kids are like the actual Bertram children are involved. You don't need any of this. Like you're just Fanny, right? You're not that important. You're the impoverished relative. Good on us for having let you into our house and let you share a space with us. So that is something, especially Mrs. Norris doesn't let Fanny ever forget, that she has to be grateful to her for what she has done for her. And it is grating throughout the novel. But even that does change. So there is a lot of growth and shifting throughout the book itself. People do come to appreciate Fanny in a way that she maybe was not appreciated at the beginning. Originally, the only person who really pays any attention to her comfort and needs is her cousin Edmund. He gets her a pony. He makes sure she exercises. He cares about what happens to her as a human being. And they end up having a very strong bond. And she ends up becoming very moon-eyed over him. And she's very much like in love with him, but they also very much have this like sibling relationship. They're also first cousins, which is gross in my humble opinion. But anyway, but his efforts don't really mean anything on their own. It really isn't until outsiders come into the story that things start to shift for Fanny. So first, the Crawfords come and they're staying at the like parsonage place where Mrs. Norris used to live, and with the new people, the Grants that live there. And the Mary Crawford is probably the first person to really look at Fanny and treat Fanny like a regular person. She comes in almost like she doesn't understand the dynamics of the house, not fully, and she comes in as this very brazen, very modern woman, and she treats Fanny like a regular person. She talks to Fanny. She's also moon-eyed over Edmund, so we have a little love triangle as well. But having Mary see Fanny as an actual person worth time and effort and interest, I think starts to shift the way people see Fanny. She's very much in the background. She has a very Anne Elliot-like persona in the sense that people forget about her, but people also want her opinions on things because Fanny's the one who's going to fix it. Like Fanny's the one who's going to give you the right answer. Fanny is the moral compass in a lot of ways in the story. The other thing that happens to change the way people view Fanny is that Sir Thomas goes to his colonies. Slavery is very much not in the background in this book, but he has to go to his colonies in the Caribbean and deal with some stuff. So he's gone for a little bit, and the kids kind of have the run of the house, and they get up to mischief. They start this play that's absolutely inappropriate, all this stuff. And that stuff is kind of fun. Mariah gets engaged to Mr. Rushworth while he's gone. Henry Crawford comes in, and he's a little like fuck boy who likes to flirt with people and stirs up some trouble. There's a lot of stuff going on while Sir Thomas is gone. When he returns, he brings back obviously the moral compass of the home. He is the rule maker, right? He is the authoritarian in the house. Not that he's like a authoritative father, but like he is the presence, right? And he comes back and he sees Fanny in a very different light compared to his kids who are busy with this play shenanigans and doing things that are really kind of inappropriate. And I think that starts to shift the way Fanny is seen and the way Fanny is treated. And Fanny becomes more a member of the family than just a charity case within the home. I think that's a very important shift for her, for the story, because once she starts to have that, then she starts to get pursued by a very specific gentleman. And this is when we see Fanny's real conviction get tested, and she stands her ground. She does not give, even though everything says that she should say yes to this man, because it is like she doesn't have anything. So like she should say yes to this man because it is more than a advantageous proposal. But she just knows this is not the person for her. She doesn't trust him. She doesn't think that he's genuine, and everyone keeps telling her she's going to change her mind, and she's like, no, 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 no. And then eventually she's proven right for being so strong in her convictions against him. I really appreciated that part of the story. But Fanny going through this experience of having to stand by her conviction that she doesn't want to marry this man for very valid reasons, despite the fact that he has money and place and, like status and standing and all these things that she doesn't have, really proves out that she's not this insipid, doormat. She is a little much. I mean, she's definitely not my favorite heroine, but she has more depth to her than I ever originally thought, and I was very happy to see that. The ending of Mansfield is a very interesting ending and very different from the other Austen novels that I've read. It is probably the least romantic of all of the novels. It feels like Edmund, who has been very smitten with Mary Crawford, despite the fact that she keeps telling him that everything that he values in life, she doesn't, and she somehow still thinks that she can change a man, even though we all know you can't. They at least finally realize that it's not going to work, and they're never going to be suited for each other. They have to figure that out after an incredible scandal that happens. It takes a really long time for the two of them to realize that they are not suited for each other, despite the fact that it's quite clear in the text that they are not suited for each other and that they will be miserable together. Mary Crawford wants a much more like plush and happy life. She wants a life that is nice and cushy and has status, and she's not particularly religious. And she has some interesting comments on religion, by the way. I think that she does make a pretty biting comment about preachers, and just because you are a preacher doesn't mean you know what you're preaching, kind of thing. Like, you have the job, yes, but how many people get up on the pulpit and just say the words but don't mean it? And I think that she has some really good biting remarks on the church, which I can feel is like, I feel Jane talking there, because I mean, she's always been around the church and clergy people, and I think that she probably had a lot of opinions on different preachers and whatnot. It was clear that they were not suited for each other, because all that Edmund wants to do is become a little clergyman man. He's very steadfast in that, and he loves his Jesus, and like Fanny does too. In the end, it's not like Fanny is picked by Edmund because he's like, oh, I've loved you this whole time. It's more like, oh, that didn't work out with this other lady, but like you're here and you're all right, so maybe I'll just marry you. And so it feels very anticlimactic from a relationship perspective. But I guess the sort of moral is like, you could marry like Fanny's mom for love and end up stuck in a small house that's loud and dirty, and your husband could be a drunk. Or you could marry like Maria to Mr. Rushworth and end up being unhappy because you married the incredibly wealthy but not suited for you man. And so then you end up doing something incredibly scandalous at the end of the novel, which feels like naughty for the time. But when you think about what Georgian England was like, it's not as naughty as you would think. I think seeing this in a Victorian novel would probably be a little bit more risque, actually. But anyway, but you could be there and you can make the good decision that ends up leaving you unhappy and scandalized and things like that. Or you can pine after your cousin for a really long time and end up in what will be probably a stable relationship. It's romantically speaking not great. It's not great. But I think the writing is incredibly mature in a way that the other books aren't. I said that in the beginning. I really was pleasantly surprised by this. And I wonder what we would have gotten if, like, this is her writing a slightly different, slightly more mature novel. I wonder what we would have gotten if she had been able to complete any more novels than the ones that we have. Would we see more hints of this kind of writing? I mean, even Persuasion, which is her last novel, feels more mature than Emma or Pride and Prejudice. It's definitely more romantic than Mansfield, but it's more grown up of a story. And it's sad that we'll never know what other books we could have gotten from her if she had been able to live longer. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Hopefully they made some sort of cohesive sense, especially as the dogs were constantly interrupting me. But this is the best we can do. We work with what we can work with, okay? This is not a professional channel. This is just one woman, a microphone, two dogs, and just chaos. So yeah, that's Mansfield. Next is Emma. I don't think I've ever actually read Emma. I've definitely seen the Gwyneth Paltrow adaptation about 1,000 times. I don't think I really like many of the other ones. The old BBC miniseries was pretty good. But yeah, I know a lot of people don't like Emma as a character, but we'll see. We'll see how I feel about it. I think she'll be interesting. She's the only independently wealthy, like, she doesn't have to marry character in Austen's novels, so she should be interesting from that perspective. Speaking of independently wealthy, I think the best ending for Mansfield would have been if for some reason somehow Fanny could have been set up to not have to marry, because marrying Edmund feels like weird, and I would have loved a much more like powerful female ending. Like, it's never going to happen, which is why I'm laughing. Fanny gets a living from her uncle and she can live on her own terms. Maybe she lives with one of her brothers, but like she can fund her own existence, right? Like she can live her own life. That is what I want for her. And I want her to then, through that, find herself, like not have to moon over Edmund. But it's the only Austen where I like don't want the romance to happen, because I don't want her with the other guy and I don't want her with Edmund. But yeah, that would have been a good, like, if Fanny could have been an independent, like a strong independent woman, that would have been nice. I would have liked that. That character arc would have been a good time. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I can't wait to talk about Emma with you. I've talked a little bit about Meet the Georgians, which is the nonfiction book that I read in conjunction with this in my August wrap up. So you can see a little bit of that there. It's also, I talked about it in my Substack. There's not a lot to talk about. It was pretty surface level. I'm trying to figure out what to read with this book. There is a book about like fashion in Jane Austen that I kind of want to get, but it's kind of expensive because it's a little bit more coffee table book like. It's like $30, I think. I could maybe see if my library has it, but I'll have to take a look and see if my library has a copy for me to go through. But that sounds really interesting. Otherwise, I'm not really sure. So if you have suggestions on good nonfiction books to read, either about the Regency period, Jane Austen, the novels themselves, whatever, let me know. I like adding this into the discussion, into my knowledge bank of stuff. I also have a book about crime in Jane Austen that I could read that's on my Kindle. But anyway, those are some options. If you have more, let me know. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I think I've rambled enough. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video, whatever it may be, because it's my channel and I can do whatever I want. Bye.